The morning sun cast long shadows across Thaddeus Merrick's barren fields as he stood at the edge of his property, counting the coins in his weathered hands for the third time. $28.75, every penny he had, managed to save over the past 11 months. His farm in the western valley of Cottonwood County had seen better days. 3 consecutive seasons of drought had left his land cracked and his hopes dwindling. Thaddeus tucked the money into a small leather pouch and slipped it into his pocket. Today was the annual Riverbrook auction, his one chance to acquire a horse that might help turn his fortunes around. His old mare, Penny, had passed away during the winter, leaving him to plow his modest fields by hand, an exhausting task that had bent his back and calloused his palms beyond recognition. "Papa, are you leaving now?" called a small voice from the porch of their simple wooden farmhouse. Thaddeus turned to see his 10-year-old daughter, Winifred, standing barefoot in her faded blue dress, her younger brother Elijah peeking out from behind her. "Yes, Winnie. Mind your brother and help your mother with the chores," he replied, his voice gentle despite the worry lines etched deep around his eyes. "I'll be back before sundown." Thaddeus's wife, Cordelia, appeared at the doorway, wiping, her hands on her apron. Her eyes held a mixture of hope and concern. They both knew what this day meant for their family's survival. "Remember what we discussed," she said softly. "No more than $20. We need the rest for seed." Thaddeus nodded, though his heart sank at the limitation. $20 would barely buy a worn-out mule, let alone a decent working horse. Still, he kissed his wife goodbye, ruffled Elijah's wheat-colored hair, and began the 6-mile walk to the auction grounds buzzed with activity when he arrived. Farmers, ranchers, and traders from 3 counties had gathered, eyeing the livestock with calculating gazes. Thaddeus felt out of place among them in his patched clothing and worn boots. He registered with the clerk and received his bidding, cattle number 42, then wandered through the pens, assessing the animals with a knowledgeable eye. Most of the horses were well beyond his budget. Sleek thoroughbreds and powerful draft horses commanded prices that made him wince. He focused instead on the back pens, where older, less impressive animals waited their turn. It was there he first saw her, a chestnut mare with one white sock, standing quietly in the corner of a muddy pen. She wasn't particularly large or impressive, but something in her steady gaze caught his attention. The placard read, "Lot 78, mare, 7 burars, untrained." "Wouldn't waste your time on that one," said a gruff voice beside him. Thaddeus turned to see Obadiah Fletcher, owner of the largest ranch in the county. "Feral thing from up in the northern hills. They've been trying to break her for months with no luck." Thaddeus studied the mare more carefully. Despite the mud caked on her coat, he could see well-formed legs and a deep chest. Her eyes weren't wild, as Fletcher suggested, but watchful and intelligent. "Sometimes the strongest will comes from the hardest beginnings," Thaddeus murmured, more to himself than to Fletcher, who snorted and moved on to inspect more promising prospects. As the auction began, Thaddeus clutched his paddle, his heart hammering. His entire family's future rested on the decision he would make today. Thaddeus watched as dozens of animals went under the hammer, each commanding prices well beyond his meager savings. His hopes dimmed with every fall of the auctioneer's gavel. Young colts sold for $50, sturdy mares for $75 or more. Even the older horses were going for $30 to $40. The crowd thinned as afternoon stretched on, many having secured their purchases and departed. Thaddeus remained, his paddle unused, waiting for Lot 78. When the chestnut mare was finally led into the auction ring, he straightened his back and moved closer. "Next up, Lot 78, untrained mare from the Northern Territories," announced the auctioneer, a barrel-chested man named Barnaby Wright. "Be advised, this one's got a mind of her own. Starting bid at $15. Do I hear 15? Silence fell over the remaining bidders. The mare pawed at the ground nervously, her head held high, as she surveyed the crowd. The handler yanked her lead rope, causing her to rear slightly. "Come now, surely worth 15 as a work animal," Wright cajoled. 14 then? 13? $10, called Thaddeus, raising his paddle for the first time that day. Wright nodded. I have 10 from number 42. Do I hear 11? No other. Paddles rose, the auctioneer's enthusiasm visibly deflated. Going once at $10, 11, came a voice from the back. Thaddeus turned to see Zachariah Thornton, the butcher from Millsville. His heart sank. Everyone knew Thornton bought unmarketable horses for slaughter. 12, Thaddeus countered, his voice stronger than he felt. 13, Thornton shot back lazily, barely raising his paddle. The bidding crawled upward dollar by dollar. By the time they reached $18, Thaddeus was sweating despite the cool afternoon breeze. He had promised Cordelia $20 maximum. 19, called Thornton, a smirk playing at his lips. Thaddeus hesitated, then raised his paddle. 20. The butcher shrugged. 21. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing the drama unfolding. Thaddeus stood frozen, Cordelia's words echoing in his mind. They needed the remaining money for seed. Without seed, there would be no crop, no food for winter, no future. But as he looked at the mare, something stirred within him. She had gone still, her eyes seemingly fixed on him as if she understood her fate hung in the balance. Going once. At 21 to number 67, Wright announced. Thaddeus thought of his children, of Winifred's dream to one day ride to school instead of walking the 3 miles each way. Of Elijah's fascination with horses, despite having rarely seen one up close since Penny died. Going twice. 25, Thaddeus called out, his voice cracking. He pulled the leather pouch from his pocket, knowing he was committing their last dollars to this untested creature. Thornton scowled. 26. Thaddeus's heart pounded. He had only $28.75. Every penny counted. 27, he countered. 28, Thornton said flatly. Thaddeus took a deep breath. $28.75, he announced, emptying his pouch entirely. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Thornton's eyes narrowed as he calculated whether the mare's meat was worth $29. After a tense moment, he shook his head. Sold to number 42 for $28.75, declared Wright, bringing down his gavel with finality. As Thaddeus approached to claim his purchase, he wondered how he would explain this decision to Cordelia. He had spent every cent they had on a horse that no one else wanted, a horse that might prove impossible to train. The handler thrust the lead rope into his hands with obvious relief. "Good luck with this one," he muttered. "She's got the devil in her." Thaddeus stood eye to eye with his new mare. She snorted softly, her breath warm against his face. "Hello there," he whispered. "Let's go home." The journey home proved more challenging than Thaddeus had anticipated. The mare, whom he'd tentatively named Ember for her fiery chestnut coat, resisted every attempt to lead her. She planted her hooves firmly, refusing to move, then suddenly lurched forward without warning, nearly yanking Thaddeus off his feet multiple times. "Easy now," he murmured, maintaining a firm but gentle grip on the lead rope. "We've got 6 miles ahead of us." As twilight descended, they had covered barely 2 miles. Thaddeus's earlier elation began to waver. Perhaps Fletcher and Thornton had been right about this wild mare. Perhaps he had made a terrible mistake with his family's last dollars. A light rain began to fall, turning the dirt road muddy. Ember grew increasingly agitated, tossing her head and sidling nervously. When thunder rumbled in the distance, she reared suddenly, breaking free from Thaddeus's grasp. "No," he cried as she bolted into a nearby field. Exhausted and mud-splattered, Thaddeus pursued her through the gloom. The rain intensified, soaking through his worn jacket. For nearly an hour, he tracked her, catching glimpses of her silhouette against the darkening sky, always just beyond his reach. Finally, he found her sheltering beneath an ancient oak tree. Trembling from the cold and fear, Thaddeus approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. "I'm not giving up on you," he told her, extending his hand. "And I won't let you give up on yourself either." Whether from exhaustion or something in his voice, Ember remained still, as he gently reclaimed her lead rope. To his surprise, she allowed him to run his hands along her neck and withers, checking for injuries. The simple gesture of trust felt like a small victory. It was fully dark by the time they resumed their journey. The rain had stopped, but the road was treacherous with mud. Thaddeus walked beside Ember rather than attempting to lead her, and, gradually, she matched her pace to his. The lights of his farmhouse came into view well after midnight. Cordelia was waiting on the porch, a lantern in her hand, her face tight with worry. "Thaddeus Merrick, where have you been?" she called as he approached, then fell silent when she saw Ember. "I know what you're thinking," he said wearily, leading the mud-covered mare into the yard. "But there's more to her than meets the eye." Cordelia studied the horse, then her husband's exhausted face. "You spent more than $20, didn't you?" "All of it," he admitted. "Every last cent." In the lantern light, he could see the color drain from his wife's face. "All of it? Even the seed money?" "She's worth it, Cordelia. I can feel it." He gestured toward Ember. "Look at her build, her legs. She's strong and she's smart." "She's wild," Cordelia countered, noticing how the mare shifted nervously at their voices. "And we needed that money." "We'll find another way for seed," Thaddeus insisted. "The Hendersons owe me for helping rebuild their barn, and I can work extra days at the lumber mill." Cordelia sighed deeply. "The children are asleep. We'll discuss this tomorrow." She turned and went inside, the door closing firmly behind her. Thaddeus led Ember to their small empty stable. He rubbed her down with handfuls of straw, clearing away the worst of the mud, and offered her fresh water and what little hay they had. To his relief, she accepted both. "Tomorrow will be better," he promised her, patting her neck before securing the stall door. As he walked back to the house under the now clear night sky, Thaddeus wondered if he had been foolish or visionary. Everything depended on this horse, that no one had wanted, this beautiful, stubborn creature who seemed as lost as he sometimes felt. Inside, the house was dark and silent. He removed his muddy boots and clothes in the kitchen, too tired to even eat the plate of cold supper Cordelia had left. In their bedroom, his wife lay with her back to his side of the bed, her breathing too measured to be genuine sleep. Thaddeus slipped under the quilt beside her. "I'm sorry for worrying you," he whispered, "and I'm sorry about the money. But I'm not sorry about Ember." Cordelia didn't respond, but in the darkness, he felt her hand find his beneath the covers. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement. For tonight, that would have to be enough. Spring unfurled across Cottonwood County, painting the landscape with fresh greens and delicate wildflowers. In the 6 weeks since the auction, Thaddeus had devoted every spare moment to Ember, rising before dawn and working with her until the day's other chores demanded his attention. Progress came in small, hard-won victories. The first time Ember allowed him to brush her without flinching. The morning she nickered softly at his approach. The afternoon she accepted a bridle without resistance. Each tiny step forward cemented Thaddeus's belief in her potential. Cordelia remained skeptical, but had softened somewhat after Thaddeus secured work at the lumber mill 3 days a week. The extra income, combined with what the Hendersons had paid for his help, had been enough to purchase seed for their most essential crops. Still, money remained perilously tight. She ate another bucket of oats, Cordelia noted one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, reviewing their dwindling supplies. "That's food we could be using for ourselves." "She needs her strength," Thaddeus replied. "I'm going to try plowing with her tomorrow." Cordelia's eyebrows rose. "You think she's ready?" "No," he admitted. "But we're running out of time to prepare." The Northfield. The following morning, Winifred and Elijah perched on the fence to watch as their father fitted Ember with a crude harness he'd fashioned from leather scraps and rope. The mare stood unnaturally still, her muscles tense beneath her gleaming coat. "Will she do it, Papa?" Elijah asked, his small face serious. "We're about to find out," Thaddeus answered, attaching the harness to their old plow. He positioned himself at the handles and clicked his tongue. "Walk on, Ember." The mare took 2 hesitant steps, then froze as she felt the weight of the plow. She snorted, pawing at the ground nervously. "Easy now." Thaddeus coaxed. "You can do this." For nearly an hour they engaged in a battle of wills, Ember refusing to pull consistently, Thaddeus refusing to give up. Sweat darkened her coat and his shirt alike. Finally, in frustration, Thaddeus released her from the harness. "Maybe Mama's right," Winifred said quietly as Ember trotted to the far end of the paddock. "Maybe she's just too wild." Thaddeus wiped the sweat from his brow. "She's not wild, Winnie. She's afraid. There's a difference." That night, unable to sleep, Thaddeus returned to the stable. Ember watched warily as he entered her stall with neither harness nor tools, just an apple saved from his own dinner. "I've been going about this all wrong," he told her, offering the fruit on his flat palm. "Trying to force you into a life you don't understand." As Ember cautiously took the apple, Thaddeus sat on a bale of straw and began to speak. He talked about the drought and the failed crops, about his fears for his family, about how much he needed her help. He spoke until his voice grew hoarse, not caring if she understood his words, only that she grew accustomed to his presence and his touch. When he finally rose to leave, Ember surprised him by gently nudging his shoulder with her muzzle. Before dawn the next morning, Thaddeus returned with the harness. This time he worked more slowly, talking constantly in soothing tones, letting Ember grow accustomed to each new sensation. When he finally connected her to the plow, he didn't immediately ask her to move. Instead, he stood beside her head, stroking her neck. "We'll do this together," he promised, one step at a time. To his amazement, when he finally moved to the plow handles and clicked his tongue, Ember stepped forward steadily. The plow blade bit into the earth, turning over rich, dark soil. They made one complete furrow, then another and another. By midday, nearly a quarter of the north field had been plowed, more than Thaddeus could have accomplished in 3 days of manual labor. Cordelia brought lunch to the field, her eyes widening at the progress. "She's doing it," she said, watching Ember pull with newfound purpose. "We're doing it," Thaddeus corrected, his face alight with pride. "Together." That evening, as they released Ember into the paddock for a well-deserved rest, Winifred approached her father. "Can I try riding her, someday?" she asked hesitantly. Thaddeus smiled. "Someday soon, I think. She's beginning to trust us." As if understanding his words, Ember trotted to the fence where they stood and lowered her head to accept Winifred's tentative touch. Autumn painted the Cottonwood Valley in rich amber and gold. The Merrick farm stood transformed from its spring desolation. The north field had yielded a modest corn crop, while the western acres flourished with hearty vegetables that Cordelia had preserved for winter. Their barn, once nearly empty, now held enough feed to see their small herd, Ember and 2 young goats, through the cold months ahead. The change in their fortunes was due largely to Ember, who had exceeded even Thaddeus's highest hopes. Once, the initial breakthrough occurred. Her training accelerated remarkably. By midsummer, she was not only plowing efficiently, but also pulling their old wagon to town, carrying Thaddeus to his mill work, and giving Winifred and Elijah rides around the property. Word of the transformation spread throughout Cottonwood County. Farmers began to visit, ostensibly to trade surplus crops or tools, but really to witness the mare that had gone from auction reject to prized farm horse. On a crisp October morning, Thaddeus was surprised to see Obadiah Fletcher's expensive buggy approaching their farm. The wealthy rancher rarely ventured to this humble corner of the county. "Merrick," Fletcher called, climbing down from his seat. "I've come on business." Thaddeus wiped his hands on his trousers, noticing with quiet satisfaction that they were no longer as calloused and cracked as they had been in spring. "What kind of business would that be?" "Your mare," Fletcher stated bluntly, nodding toward the paddock where Ember grazed. "I'll give you $75 for her, cash today." The amount made Thaddeus's breath catch. $75 was more money than his family had seen at once in years. It could buy a new plow, proper winter clothing for the children, perhaps even a down payment on the adjacent 5 acres he'd long coveted. "Why the sudden interest?" Thaddeus asked, playing for time as his mind raced. Fletcher shrugged. "Word is she works harder than horses twice her size, And she's got good lines, better than I gave her credit for at the auction. He pulled a leather wallet from his coat. I'll make it 80, but that's my final offer. Before Thaddeus could respond, the farmhouse door opened. Winifred, Elijah, and Cordelia emerged, curious about their visitor. Papa, are we going to town? Elijah asked, running to his father's side. Not today, Thaddeus answered, ruffling the boy's hair. Mr. Fletcher, here was just leaving. Fletcher's eyebrows rose. You're turning down $80? For a horse you paid less than 30 for? For a member of our family, Thaddeus corrected firmly. Ember's not for sale at any price. The rancher studied him for a long moment, then gave a short laugh. Well, I can't say I blame you. Fine animal. He climbed back into his buggy. If you change your mind before winter sets in, you know where to find me. As Fletcher's buggy disappeared down the lane, Cordelia slipped her arm through her husband's. $80 is a lot of money, she said softly. It is, Thaddeus agreed. But some things can't be measured in dollars. That evening, after the children were asleep, Thaddeus and Cordelia sat on their porch swing, watching stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. In the paddock, Ember's silhouette was visible in the moonlight. Do you ever regret it? Cordelia asked suddenly. Spending our last money on her that day? Thaddeus considered the question seriously. There were moments, he admitted. Those first few weeks when she fought the harness and I couldn't see a way forward. He reached for his wife's hand. But no, I don't regret it. She taught me something important. What's that? That sometimes the things everyone else overlooks turn out to be the most valuable. He squeezed her fingers gently. Just like this little farm that nobody wanted but us. Cordelia rested her head against his shoulder. The children are different. 2. More confident. Elijah doesn't cry about going to school anymore, not since you started letting him ride with Winifred on Ember. They're proud, Thaddeus said. Of her, of our farm, of themselves. In the paddock, Ember lifted her head as if sensing their conversation, her silhouette strong and dignified against the night sky. From auction discard to the pride of their farm, her journey had mirrored their own transformation from struggling farmers to a family standing firmly on their own ground. She was worth every penny, Cordelia murmured. Every last cent. Thaddeus nodded, watching as their mare returned to her peaceful grazing under the autumn moon. That desperate last-second bid had been more than a financial gamble. It had been an act of faith. Faith in himself, in his judgment, in the potential that others had failed to see. And in the end, that faith, like Ember herself, had carried them all to higher ground.